Thanks very much, and hello and welcome from us this week. What future for the left in the capital? Attempting to answer that, we've got Jeremy Corbyn here, the London Labour MP who's in the race to lead his party. Welcome to you. And we've also joined by Gavin Barwell, Conservative MP for Croydon Central, who can bring his own entirely impartial views to bear on Labour's condition. First, though, it wouldn't feel right without once again mentioning Heathrow. It looks as if the Davis Commission into the UK's future aviation needs will be reporting this week. And the Mayor helpfully reminded the Prime Minister about the importance of keeping promises, even if made 5 years ago.
My view, which I've stuck to now for many years, that David Cameron, George Osborne and I, everybody made the same commitment in 2010. We made a very clear manifesto commitment, no ifs, no buts. There wouldn't be a third runway at Heathrow.
Which presumably means, Gavin Barwell, that if Davis recommends Heathrow, it can't happen, it won't happen. There's no point in him recommending Heathrow.
Well, that commitment wasn't repeated in the 2015 manifesto. I think we need to wait and see.
Actually, just that's a good point. So, commitments and promises and pledges are
for
by
5 years of
just. You want to make that clear that just for one Parliament, and then they are time limited. Are they?
Absolutely, but I mean, we have to wait and see what the Davis Commission says. As a Croydon MP, personally, I'm enthusiastic about the idea of looking at Gatwick. I think in terms of jobs for my constituents and also choice for Londoners, there's a lot to commend that. But we've set up this commission to look at this issue in detail. They've published an interim report that says that we do need some additional capacity in London and the South East, but we need to wait and see what they say before having a debate about it and deciding what's the right way forward.
Why doesn't Boris Johnson then know? But Boris Johnson will know the convention that something is kind of time limited then and just exists for the extent of one Parliament, and then you have another look at the policies. Then why is he doing that then?
Well, Boris is the MP for Uxbridge. I think a lot of the MPs in that immediate area obviously have strong views on the issue of a third runway at Heathrow. He's absolutely entitled to express those views. But I think the right thing for the government to do is to wait and to see what the Commission has to say, and then we can discuss the options and come up with a solution. It's an issue that we do need to address, not just for London's future, but for the economy of the UK as a whole. You know, we do need to make sure we've got the right capacity in the right locations. We've set up this commission that's looked at this in great detail. Let's see what they say, and then let's have a debate about it.
Generally, some Labour figures are saying exactly the same, actually. Let's just wait and see before we make any kind of decision. Have you decided already?
Well, we haven't got the report yet, and this issue has been debated as long as I can remember, and I'll be interested to see the report. I have always opposed the third runway at Heathrow for reasons of noise, overflying, and intrinsically, I think, danger from that. But I do think we need to look at the wider issue of transport infrastructure, rail connections between airports, and the need to reduce the number of short-haul flights there are.
But you're not going to change your mind then, anyway? You wouldn't change your mind if they're on Heathrow? I have
always opposed the third runway at Heathrow because I just think it's a danger and an environmental damage.
So if Davis recommends that, having looked at all the evidence, you'd say if you were in government, we're just going to ignore this?
Well, Davis is going to give his report. At the end of the day, there's going to be a political decision taken whether to go ahead with the third runway there, or a runway at Gatwick, or a rail connection between Stansted, Gatwick and Heathrow. There's a number of options on the table. I hope that Davis has looked seriously at the question of reducing the number of flights, because remember, we've got larger aircraft which require therefore less runway capacity in total.
OK, let's move on. With Jeremy with us, it's an opportunity to look at the condition of the left in London, we thought, and consider why much of it now organises outside Labour. Andrew Cryan has this.
Last weekend, tens of thousands filled the streets of the capital, demanding an end to what they call the government's programme of austerity. But only one of the four candidates to be the next leader of the Labour Party addressed the crowd.
We want a state that takes responsibility, a community that takes responsibility for everybody to ensure nobody is destitute. We each care for all, everyone caring for everybody else. I think it's called socialism.
Organisers say that the left wing in London is about much more than just the Labour Party.
In London, we're going to be mobilising against what this government's planning on doing. We're going to be uniting with people in the Labour Party. We're going to be uniting with people in the Greens, the trade unions, and the thousands of individuals who are angry about what this government's doing. And we're going to say to the government that we're not going away, we're only going to get stronger, and we will put an end to austerity within the next few weeks or months.
I was a miner, I was
Indeed, the Labour Party has a long history of not fully endorsing left-wing movements. The General Strike, the Jarrow March and the Miners' Strike all happened without the support of the Labour leadership at the time, which is not entirely dissimilar to today. In 2013, the last year we have figures for, there were more days lost to strike action in London than any other part of the UK. And many of those were organised by unions unaffiliated to the Labour Party, including teachers, tube workers and the Fire Brigade Union.
The Fire Brigade Union disaffiliated from Labour in 2004. We'd been affiliated since 1918. In 2002-03 we had a long-running industrial battle over pay under the then Blair government, and there was a huge amount of anger about that, and in 2004 our conference voted very clearly to disaffiliate.
But although they're no longer part of the Labour Party, the Fire Brigades Union are backing Jeremy Corbyn for the leadership.
It should be a bit of a no-brainer for trade unions that if you look at Jeremy Corbyn's record on trade union rights, on the issues affecting workers in Britain, on the cuts that we're facing to public services, on wages, on attacks on pensions, on all these issues, Jeremy Corbyn doesn't just talk sound bites, and he comes out and supports people who are campaigning.
But while he might have the support of left-wingers outside the party, Jeremy Corbyn needs support of Labour members. In Parliament, nearly half of his nominations for the leadership came from London MPs. The only snag is that many of those MPs are supporting other people for the leadership. They just think Mr Corbyn would be good for the debate.
I'm actually backing Yvette Cooper, who I don't think is afraid of this sort of debate, and actually it is really important for some of the things that Jeremy may say. It'll give her an opportunity to say that sounds attractive, Jeremy, but, or I agree with you. I think it's just important just to have a proper debate. Why are we afraid of that? We're not.
The Labour Party are also in the middle of choosing a candidate to be Mayor of London. As they do, many will be conscious of the fact that there's already one left-wing candidate who's declared from another party. Respects former MP for Bethnal Green and Bow, George Galloway.
And then enter stage left, said George Galloway, a Respect leader who is running for mayor. I'll come and have a word in a moment, but let's just begin with Jeremy. Did you think Labour in London could have done better? Were you surprised? Did you expect them to do better than they did, given that they won several seats and scored something like 44% share of the vote?
It was a good result for Labour in London overall, for sure. We didn't gain some of the other places we might well have gained. There was thoughts of gaining Finchley and Golders Green and Croydon Central, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
We didn't.
Why didn't you?
I didn't campaign in Croydon Central.
Ah, right, that was it.
So
What was it? What was the limit? What was the limit of the reach? It wasn't presumably that Labour weren't saying enough about austerity.
I think the limit of the reach was that whilst Ed Miliband was saying very good stuff on 0 hours contract, rights of work and things like that, underneath it the problem was that an incoming Labour government was going to continue with a degree of austerity. There would have been further cuts in local government expenditure, which are now being done big time by the Conservative government, and I think that disillusioned some Labour supporters. My whole take on this leadership campaign, this leadership debate, is that Labour should and must offer a very clear economic alternative. The point of austerity is actually inequality, impoverishing the poorest and increasing the wealth of the richest, and London is now a more divided city than it's ever been.
Well, on that basis then, with that kind of certainty or a clearer message, you think you would have, removed Gavin Barwell from his seat, you would have won Golders Green, Hendon, you'd have got back places like Battersea, would you?
The interesting figure was the turnout one. Older people turned out in reasonable numbers, younger people turned out less than 50% in the election, even though they were overwhelmingly voting Labour in the election. Labour also lost some support in some areas to the Greens, not huge amounts, but enough to make a difference in a number of English constituencies.
George Galloway, Jeremy Corbyn thinks Labour did well in London, but do you think they did well in London? They win 7 seats.
I don't think you can say you've done well when fewer than 50% of the young people are turning out to vote, and thus the dichotomy you're now discussing. The gap between rich and poor in London today is wider than it was when Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist. But you would never know that from the narrative, as they put it, that Labour politicians, with the exception of people like Jeremy, are constantly spinning. If Jeremy was the leader of the Labour Party, we wouldn't have this dichotomy. But the truth is most of the people in the anti-austerity movement, most of the people in the anti-war movement. Jeremy and I are leaders together in the anti-war movement, but he's the only significant Labour figure who's involved, and was the only Labour leading figure who spoke at the massive anti-austerity march, and that's why we have this dichotomy.
So you think as well that if the message had been stronger on austerity by Labour, they would really win areas like Croydon and Hendon and Battersea? Yes. Surely the reason why they didn't win those areas was the opposite.
No, I know what you mean, but my point is a different one. That the fewer, less than 50% who turned out, who were not older voters, might have turned out if you'd enthused them, energised them. I'm not saying you would have won people who voted Tory rather than Labour.
But you're talking about a whole area of identifying if you bring them in, and they weren't able to do that.
Millions. Only 38% of the people turned out to vote for London Mayor, and that was with Ken Livingstone as the candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that mayoral subject, though, why would they offer, or why would they come to you when there is a clear Labour alternative, and the Labour is seen as a clear alternative, and when everyone is saying that for Labour to win, they should be reaching out to the Conservative supporters, not going out to the left?
That's
why have
the
you got
point.
a chance?
They're all reaching across the aisle to the Tories, borrowing Tory clothes, parading up and down in them, with the exception of Jeremy in the leadership
because
campaign.
that's the way, that's the only way to win in London, as we know, because as Boris Johnson has shown, and as early polling would indicate, Zach Goldsmith might do. How you cannot win being a polarising figure from one side, can you?
Forgive me, you're missing my point. It's the 60-odd% of people who didn't vote that have to be motivated, enthused and brought to the ballot. Of course, one wants to convert a Tory to a left-wing position, but it's very, very unlikely. But there are huge swathes, millions of people, who've fallen out of the political market because no one seems to represent them. No one seems to speak for them. And I do, and always have, and have high hopes that I can get them to the polls.
What do you think when you look at this, Gavin?
Well, I'd say two things. The first is I admire Jeremy, because I think if you compare him with the three people he's running against, they were all telling us a few months ago they all supported Ed Miliband, and now they're running to disassociate themselves from his policies, whereas Jeremy is saying exactly what he was saying before the general election. I admire that. But this argument is uncannily like what some right-wing Conservatives tried to say in 1997. They said the reason Blair beat us was because Tories stayed at home and Tories voted for the referendum party. And actually, the real issue was that 2 million Conservatives switched to voting Labour. And the reason that Labour didn't win Croydon Central is because the Conservative vote went up by about 3,000 votes compared with 2010, despite all the tough things that we've had to do over the last 5 years. And if you embark on this strategy where you ignore the key swing voters between the two main parties, I think Labour will just repeat the result it had last time. From my point of view, that wouldn't be a terrible thing.
No. And Jeremy Corbyn, do you accept or do you think that given that we have seen 3-4 years of pretty tough austerity, and we know and we hear yet more evidence of it this week, what's going to be happening to local government services, why is it that people did not come over to Labour and did not come over to this anti-austerity message? The people out there are acuter, aren't they? They realise hard decisions had to be made.
Exactly.
Well, the hard decisions are being made at the expense of the very poorest and most vulnerable in our society. There are more people sleeping rough than for many years. There are more people homeless, more people in bed and breakfast and short stay accommodation, greater poverty, miserable lives of people in the private rented sector. Londoners need something pretty radical to save this city, to be...
Just challenge that.
Very briefly.
Thousands more people in work. Child poverty rates, the figures came out yesterday, the left were all predicting it would go up. Actually, child poverty rates are lower than at any time since the mid-80s.
Come with me to Euston Road tonight and look at the people sleeping rough there.
Of course there are problems, but this narrative that they've all got worse over the last few years is not, in fact, true. Under this government, more and more Londoners are getting into work.
The gap between the richest and poorest in London is bigger than it's ever been. The housing stress is greater than it's ever been. Your policy,
before we lose
selling off council housing and housing association property will make it worse.
Because you're against this kind of aspiration that you're losing.
It's not an aspiration. It's an aspiration for everybody to get
before he has to leave us. George Galloway, the point Gavin makes, though, about jobs, and the same point that one puts to Jeremy, the public had a long time to consider that these were tough times and the impact of austerity. You're now trying to burst into a mayoral battle here with a very similar message.
Well, there's an LBC poll running now, and I'm at the top of it, and that's because people, the 60-odd% who didn't vote, think that someone might be coming over the hill who can speak and
Why
fight
if
for
Ken
them.
Livingstone, though, didn't do it,
Well,
when there was a real sense of independence as well for London, and why when Boris Johnson didn't get those numbers out, even though we know he got a huge number of people out to defeat Ken, why would you do that now?
Well, he speaks for the people who are dripping in gold. I speak for the others. Ken Livingstone, when he won as an independent, as I'm effectively running, got the best result ever. He smashed a man called Frank Dobson that no one even remembers, who was a cabinet minister.
But the turnout was very low there as well, though, wasn't
yes,
it?
but
if he wasn't, the point I'm making very
smashed
simply, what is different? He wasn't able to do it. Boris Johnson wasn't able to do anything fundamentally about that turnout in young people. Why should we believe you would be able to do that?
I think it's already happening. That someone who is widely held to be a person who can advocate for the downtrodden, can be a voice for the voiceless, is in this race now. Labour is likely to choose one or other of Mr. or Mrs. Bland. Zach Goldsmith is a fine fellow, he's a friend of mine, but he is a £600,000 a month beneficiary of a £700 million.
I thought he was the man you were referring to, who just entered the race to make it really exciting. George Galloway, we'll have to stop it there, actually. Thank you very much indeed for the time. This week saw the death of 2 more cyclists on London's roads, leading to fresh focus on safety, especially relating to female cyclists, and renewed calls for peak-time lorry bans. Raphael Sheridan has a few details.
These were the scenes on Wednesday morning, as cyclists protested at Bank about their safety at the junction where a cyclist was killed on her way to work on Monday. Last year, 13 cyclists died, and more than 400 were seriously injured on the capital's roads. Just this month, the Mayor pledged to halve that number by 2020. And in 2013, he outlined a £900 million investment programme to build new cycle superhighways and reconstruct junctions. But some critics have complained about the timetable.
The money is on the table, so we have no idea why between them, the City of London, TfL, the Mayor's office, cannot get their act together to make sure those safe designs are put on the ground as soon as possible. We understand it could be as late as 2020 before anything happens. So that's just scandalous.
And another fact is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Women are twice as likely to die when cycling in London, and since 2009, 4 out of every 5 women killed cycling have been involved in collisions with lorries.
Well, we had this issue last year. Obviously, you know, no one can escape seeing all the work that's being done, the construction, the programme of work, but is that enough? We've seen, you know, 2 more deaths here. I mean, what do you say about a lorry ban, for instance?
I think it's an idea that we have to look at. I think there's been real progress made. Actually, the number of people killed or seriously injured, cyclists killed or seriously injured, went down 12% last year. It's at the lowest level that it's ever been. But when you see young people's lives being lost on our streets in this way, it's never enough. And we've got to make more progress. There's a huge amount of money being spent on quiet ways, on the superhighways. I think there has to be a real focus on looking at some of the most problematic junctions. And I think we also do need to look at this issue of HGVs, because I think this year, 7 of the 8 deaths have involved a collision with an HGV, and last year I think it was 5 out.
And Jeremy Corbyn, I think you're a cyclist as well, aren't you? As whatever, would you agree that, you know, Boris Johnson has certainly made cycling a priority and put it up there and deployed the policies necessary to make this a cycle-friendly city?
I cycle every day from my home to Westminster and all around the place. I cycle a great deal, and cycling is a great way to travel. It keeps you fit, it's quick, and everything else. But it is not without its dangers, and we now have the largest number of cyclists for many, many years, probably ever, in London. And there are dangers. The dangers are of traffic light arrangements, are of junction arrangements. The dangers are also of HGV vehicles, where the drivers are not necessarily bad drivers. They're often very good drivers. They simply cannot see.
Do you think it's got less safe since you've been cycling?
No, because I think more drivers are also cyclists themselves and are more aware of cyclists. But I do think we've got to get onto the case. Junction improvements, segregated cycle lanes on the big roads, but we've also got on the case of big lorries. Over big lorries in London are not necessary. Lower cab levels are very important, because a high high-up cab. The driver simply cannot see what is going on. And we've got to treat every cycle death and every cycle accident as a major, major incident where you examine it in the minutest detail, you learn the lessons, but above all, you act on those lessons.
Why don't you use more more compunction, make compulsory shifting deliveries and so on by lorries so they're not on the peak time? You don't instinctively, as a party and perhaps as a person, want to do that, do you?
No, I think it's something we need to look at. I think if you look at these figures and you see the HGVs, I have no problem with looking at that at all. There is a safer lorry scheme that's coming online on 1st of September, which is looking at sidebars, looking at this issue about cab height that Jeremy's talking about.
Cab height is crucial.
So, you know, I think when you see people losing their lives on our roads, young people with their futures ahead of them, we've got to look at all of the possible measures we could take. Cycling is very important, but we should also look at pedestrian safety as well. Yeah. Actually, the figures there are not as good in terms of the reductions in injuries.
Absolutely, but something we're going to be turning our attention to.
We are rebalancing road space, and we need to get real with pedestrians and cyclists.
Absolutely, lots to cram in this week. It's time for the rest of the week's political news in 60 seconds.
Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe claims an increase in knife crime is a result of the reduction in the number of stop and searches. Sir Bernard is said to be considering increasing searches following a rise in knife crime in London last year. Sir Peter Hendy is standing down as Commissioner for Transport for London to become the new chair of Network Rail. Sir Peter has been tasked with reviewing the company's programme of rail investment. The Mayor is launching a report emphasising the importance of giving young people information about getting a job when they leave school. Mr Johnson says there needs to be an easy-to-navigate careers system. Conservative Richmond Park MP Zach Goldsmith has received the overwhelming backing of his constituents to make a bid to be the next London Mayor.
Jeremy, there was one terrible stabbing in Islington, very near you anyway, recently. Some people were saying then they wouldn't mind seeing the police go back to some intensive stop and searches. Do you agree with that?
There's already a great deal of stop and search going on. I haven't noticed any huge reduction in it. The incident that happened was beyond appalling. The deaths from knife crime were appalling. And
do you think that the Met should put in more, should do more?
I think it's a question of education as well, and it's also a question of preventing people taking knives around with them into public places and all that. So, yes, I have no problem with people being...
Let me ask Gavin that in the time we've got left as well. Would you support, because we know the problems that there have been around a stop and search, and we seem to have made some improvements in the confidence among certain communities. Would we want to go back?
I wouldn't want to go back to what we used to do. I wouldn't want to go back to the sort of blanket stop and searching. I think if it's intelligence-led, and I think if it's done in a respectful way, it is an entirely legitimate tactic to keep our streets safe. We have made a bit of progress on confidence, but we're not where we need to be.
But Gavin, the real point is to say to people, look, carrying a knife is dangerous for you.
Jeremy, no time to you both. Thanks very much indeed. Andrew, back to you.